Sir, there's been a mistake. Seat 1A is not yours. Please move to another row. In that instant, the entire cabin froze. Every eye turned toward the man seated in the front row, Dr. Adrian Cole, 40, 5 years old. A tailored Savile Row suit framed his broad shoulders. A Patek Philippe glinted under the warm cabin light. But to the flight attendant standing before him, none of that mattered. To her, Adrian was simply a passenger who did not belong. He did not flare up, did not frown. He only raised his head slightly, eyes deep enough to pierce through the soul of the one confronting him. What he felt was not surprise, but the weary fatigue of a man far too accustomed to skeptical glances, to hearing the same question over and over his entire life. Do you really belong here? Just 30 minutes earlier, in the VIP lounge at JFK, the scene had been entirely different. The clink of crystal glasses, murmurs about yachts in Monaco, the whisper of expensive cashmere fabric, all of it blended into a symphony of the elite. Alone in one corner sat Adrian, silent, unassuming, yet his very presence pulled attention the way gravity bends light. At 45, Adrian carried the aura of a man who had faced the world and won. Solaritech, the company he built from nothing, had transformed the global energy industry. Its solid-state batteries were not just technology, they were a declaration of war against the fossil fuel era. In Frankfurt, a contract worth billions awaited his signature, a single stroke of the pen that would rewrite the future. And yet, even with all that glory, Adrian understood one cold truth. The first impression others had of him was never CEO, never pioneer. It was simply the face of a black man in a pristine white room. When the boarding call was announced, Adrian calmly gathered his papers. Every movement radiated a stillness that bordered on defiance. The gate agent glanced at his name, her eyes flickering with surprise before her tone shifted abruptly. "Have a pleasant flight, Dr. Cole." He nodded without expression. First class opened like another world, wide leather seats, amber light, the subtle scent of oak polished into every detail. Adrian stowed his case, settled into seat 1A, the most prestigious position in the cabin. He exhaled softly. To him, the seat was no symbol. It was simply a place to focus on the deal that would transform an industry. A flight attendant approached, blonde hair pinned neatly, a forced smile. The name tag read, Linda Marsh, 48. "Would you care for a pre-flight drink, sir?" Her tone was clipped, courtesy stretched to its limit. "Just water. Room temperature," Adrian answered evenly, his voice low and steady. As Linda turned away, Adrian caught the glance she cast, as if he were an anomaly that didn't fit within this curated scene of luxury. He was used to it. Too used to it. He opened his tablet, scanning growth charts, each line a steep arrow cutting through the old market. A faint smile touched his lips. This was proof no one could deny. But prejudice required no logic. It only needed a moment, a glance, a single word. The click of heels echoed down the carpeted aisle. A woman entered. Margaret Ellison, 58, draped in Chanel, clutching a Louis Vuitton bag, and a pampered little dog. She carried herself like proof of inherited privilege, sweeping into first class as if she owned it. Her eyes landed on Adrian. The corner of her mouth curved. Isn't there some mistake here? Seat 1A is mine. It was not a question, but a declaration. A declaration that her entitlement outweighed tickets, procedures, even numbers. And for Linda Marsh, who had been waiting for such a cue, it was an unspoken command. "Sir." Linda's voice now rose, cold and sharp. "There seems to be a system error. Seat 1A is not yours." In that moment, Adrian closed his tablet. His gaze rose slowly, locking first on Linda, then Margaret. No raised voice, no wasted gesture. Only silence, heavy as a storm about to break. A silence that signaled the battle had begun, though neither woman realized they had just provoked the wrong man. The atmosphere in first class shifted instantly. Whispers rose like wind seeping through cracks, spreading quickly across the rows. Dark-suited executives, a famous actress hiding behind a fashion magazine, a handful of millionaires accustomed to the front row. All of them stole discreet glances toward the seat 1A. Adrian Cole sat upright, eyes never leaving his challengers. He had weathered thousands of negotiations, staring down bank chairmen, industry ministers, cunning billionaires. Yet the look in Margaret Ellison's eyes was achingly familiar, doubt laced with disdain. Margaret tilted her head toward Linda Marsh, lowering her voice but loud enough for others to hear. "It must be a system error. My husband, Robert Ellison, is this airline's most important client. He will be furious if he finds out I was forced to sit in row 3. Her words dropped like acid into the cabin, drawing frowns from several passengers. Linda Marsh immediately straightened, as though handed the justification she had been waiting for. She moved closer to Adrian. "Sir," her voice now firm, "this passenger is a long-time Platinum Elite member. We typically reserve seat 1A for special clients like her. It seems your ticket may have been mistakenly upgraded." Adrian closed his tablet lightly, his fingertip still resting on its cool carbon case. He raised an eyebrow, his voice low and steady, without a ripple. "The ticket was booked 3 months ago. The boarding pass scanned 10 minutes ago. Both clearly say, seat 1A, name Adrian Cole. I don't see any mistake." That calmness landed like a counterblow. Linda faltered for a moment, but Margaret quickly cut in. "Oh, please don't argue. Obviously, he's not the type who usually sits here. Give up the seat to the right person. You'll be thanked for it." A few passengers raised their brows. Others quickly dropped their eyes, feigning interest in their entertainment screens. No one dared intervene. The air grew heavy, as though the cabin itself had dipped 1,000 feet lower. Adrian inhaled slowly. In his mind, the face of his late father appeared. The man who once wore a porter's cap at Grand Central Station, bowing beneath countless scornful stares. His father's voice echoed from the past. "They will try to trap you inside their box. Don't waste your strength breaking it. Build your own floor instead." Adrian's lips curved in the faintest smile. He did not argue. His silence only stoked Margaret's impatience. She placed her hands on her hips, her voice shrill. "Linda, call the cabin manager now. I will not sit in 3B while my seat in 1A is taken." The sharp cadence of footsteps approached from the front. Daniel Wu, the purser, appeared. A man in his 50s of Asian descent, his expression tense, his professional smile fixed in place. His glance flicked from Margaret to Adrian, and in that brief instant, Adrian read it clearly. A choice had already been made. A choice in favor of superficial wealth and status against the customer being pushed aside. "Mr. Cole," Daniel lowered his voice, polite yet hollow. "There seems to be some confusion. To avoid further trouble, please move to seat 3B. It's just as comfortable." The words sliced through the taut silence like shears snapping a string. A few passengers exhaled, believing the matter resolved. Margaret smiled in triumph, stroking her little dog, as though soothing the prize she was certain was hers. But Adrian did not move. He raised his head, his eyes blazing like forged steel. One word fell, heavy as a hammer strike. "No." Linda paled. Daniel faltered. Margaret let out a mocking laugh. The cabin tilted into a vortex of silence. Inside Adrian, fury boiled like magma trapped beneath ice. He knew this moment was only the prelude, and within minutes these people would discover a brutal truth. The man they had tried to belittle was not just another passenger. He was the one who held in his hands the fate of hundreds of millions of dollars tied directly to this very airline. First class was plunged into silence. Only the low hum of the engines vibrated up from beneath the wings. Every gaze felt like a needle aimed at seat 1A. On one side sat Dr. Adrian Hull. Posture unshakable, his single word "no" still reverberating in everyone's ears. On the other was Margaret Ellison, her cheeks flushed with triumph, convinced that her husband's social power would crush any resistance. Chief Flight Attendant Linda Marsh gripped her serving tray. Her face flushed red. Purser Daniel Wu stood in the aisle, forcing a diplomatic smile, though sweat dotted his forehead. "Mr. Cole," Daniel said, voice raised in an attempt to reassert control. "I am the highest authority in this cabin. To ensure this flight departs on schedule, I am ordering you to move to seat 3B immediately. If you refuse, I will be forced to call airport security." The final words landed with the sharpness of a blade, driving him into a corner. Margaret let out a cutting laugh. "You see, in the end, order must be restored. Men like him, they were never 1A. A sharp gasp came from seat 2A. The famous actress who had been hiding behind a fashion magazine, her eyes wide with shock at such blatant prejudice. An elderly businessman in 1B cleared his throat, then lowered his gaze, choosing silence. Adrian lifted his head slowly. His eyes locked on Daniel's, cold and precise, like a surgeon's scalpel. "You claim this is cabin seniority policy. Then show me where that clause exists in Aero Global's contract of carriage." Daniel faltered. Linda glanced quickly at Margaret, then back to him. The hesitation lasted only a few seconds, but it was enough for everyone to sense the truth. The excuse was fabricated. Adrian continued, his voice steady, deliberate, like a formal indictment. "My ticket confirms seat 1A. My boarding pass says the same. The ground staff welcomed me through proper procedure. I see no system error here, only the prejudice standing right in front of me." The air thickened. A few passengers inhaled sharply. A woman in 2C muttered, "Oh my God," before falling silent. Cornered, Daniel hardened his tone. "Mr. Cole, This is a direct order. If you refuse, we will call security to board this plane. You will be removed from this flight immediately." The heavy threat dropped like turbulence, rattling the cabin. Linda nodded eagerly, her eyes glinting with satisfaction. Margaret sat straighter, smiling broadly, certain victory was within reach. But Adrian did not move. He leaned back, shoulders relaxed, his voice flat as steel. "Do it." Daniel froze. Linda blinked in disbelief. Margaret's painted lips stalled mid-smile. Adrian slowly placed his tablet on the tray table, folding his arms across his chest. "By all means, call security. I would very much like to hear them explain this policy you have just invented. And I am even more interested to know what the CEO of Aero Global will think when he hears his staff humiliated a passenger under such a ridiculous pretense." For several seconds the cabin went deathly still. His words were not loud, but their weight shook the air. Daniel swallowed hard. Linda's face drained of color. Margaret bit back her fury, fingers clutching the handle of her Louis Vuitton bag until her knuckles turned white. Adrian lowered his head and closed his eyes briefly, as though finishing a file on his desk. But in his mind, a storm was gathering. He knew that with a single, simple action, one message, he could shift the fate of every person standing before him. And they, all of them, still had no idea that they were playing a game of power against the wrong opponent. The atmosphere in first class was tight as a drawn bowstring. Everyone waited for the sound of security's footsteps, waited to see the spectacle of a black man in a suit being dragged from his seat. But to their surprise, Dr. Adrian Cole opened his eyes, his pupils gleaming like polished steel. He gave a slight nod, his voice deep, drained of all emotion. "Very well. If that is what you want, I will move to 3B. A collective sigh of relief rippled through the cabin. Daniel Wu saw a way out and nodded eagerly. Linda Marsh beamed, quickly pulling a carry on aside to clear the space. Margaret Ellison burst into laughter, stroking the fur of her tiny dog as though she were raising a champagne glass in victory. "You see, in the end, you always return to your proper place," she said smugly. Adrian gave no reply. He rose slowly, every movement deliberate and calm. He lifted his tablet, but left his carbon fiber suitcase in the overhead bin above seat 1A. Left there on purpose. A small detail, like planting a flag on conquered ground, unnoticed by anyone in the cabin. He walked to seat 3B and sat down without glancing at Margaret once. She immediately sprawled into seat 1A, stretching her legs, slipping off her shoes, signaling Linda to bring the finest champagne. Her smile widened, as if the universe had just been restored to its old order. The other passengers began whispering. A few sympathetic glances flickered toward Adrian, but quickly retreated. No one wanted involvement. No one wanted to be the one to delay the flight. Meanwhile, Adrian sat still, his hands resting lightly on his knees. Outside, luggage carts rattled and the engines rumbled, preparing to taxi. But in his mind, every moment slowed, solidifying like molten glass. He drew a small phone from his inner pocket. Not the company issued one, but his private line, reserved for contacts only a few possessed. His fingers moved quickly, decisively. A short message appeared. Richard, on flight AG714, my seat 1A, was stripped from me by flight attendant Linda Marsh and purser Daniel Wu, given instead to passenger Margaret Ellison. They cited cabin seniority. Is this a new aero-global policy? I need to know, before deciding whether Solara Tech will proceed with the $200 million global contract with the airline. Adrian. He attached a photo of his boarding pass. Adrian Cole, seat 1A. An irrefutable piece of evidence. His finger pressed send. The message vanished, traveling straight to the personal device of Richard Hale, CEO of Aero Global Airlines, the very man Margaret had threatened to call to complain about the passenger she so casually dismissed. Adrian placed the phone down on the tray table, opened an in-flight magazine, and flipped to a random page. Outside, the engines thundered louder. The pilot's voice announced preparations for taxi. The passengers sighed with relief, convinced the ordeal was over. But Adrian alone knew. The true game had only just begun. His retreat had been the trap, a snare waiting for the crew and the Ellison family to stumble headlong into. In seat 1A, Margaret raised her champagne, laughter still dripping from her lips. At last, everything is as it should be. But in seat 3B, Adrian Cole sat motionless, the faint curve of a smile at his lips. Not the smile of defeat, but of a man who had already cast his net, waiting only for the fish to bite. First class slowly regained its usual rhythm. Margaret Ellison's laughter rang out, drowning the soft hum of the engines as they warmed. Linda Marsh bent over to pour more champagne, her eyes gleaming as though she had just restored order to the entire world. Purser Daniel Wu quietly adjusted his watch, his chest swelling with relief. He believed the storm had passed. Only Dr. Adrian Cole remained still in seat 3B, his eyes scanning the words on a glossy magazine page, while his mind drifted elsewhere. He knew it was only a matter of time. More than 1,000 miles away, in the glass tower headquarters of Aero Global in Chicago, Richard Hale's private phone buzzed. The screen lit up with a name that made his stomach tighten. Adrian Cole. Even before opening the message, Richard felt a chill creep down his spine. Just weeks earlier, he had bent over backward to negotiate for Aero Global's chance at securing a $200 million contract with Solara Tech. It was not just a contract, but a lifeline in the brutal post-pandemic airline market. His fingers trembled slightly as he opened the message. The blood drained from his face as he read. A photo of a boarding pass stared back. Seat 1A. Name Adrian Cole. Beneath it, calm yet razor-sharp words. Is this Aero Global's new policy? I need to know before we decide to finalize our contract. Richard felt an empire collapsing in his gut. There was no time to think. His phone lit again as he typed an emergency directive straight into the global operations system. Back in first class. Daniel Wu was walking past the aisle when the company-issued device in his pocket vibrated violently. He glanced at the screen. A single line glowed red with internal priority code. Flight 714, ground immediately. Await further instructions. E-R-H. Daniel's face went ashen, the blood draining completely. Linda, standing nearby, caught a glimpse and felt her own heart skip. What is it?" she stammered. She hauled. Daniel said nothing. He stood frozen, his eyes locking on seat 3B, where Adrian calmly flipped a magazine page, the corner of his mouth curved ever so slightly. In that look, Daniel understood everything. The man he had just humiliated was no ordinary passenger. He was not someone to be pushed aside. He was the one person who held the power to end their entire careers. In the cockpit, the pilots were preparing to taxi when the intercom crackled with a sudden command. "Stop! Do not move from the gate. This order comes directly from the CEO's office." The words spilled into the cabin speakers, leaving passengers stunned. Margaret furrowed her brow. "What now? I paid for service, not to sit around waiting," she snapped, snapping her fingers at Linda, still oblivious to the tidal wave rising beneath her feet. Around the cabin, murmurs began. Some passengers exchanged nervous glances, noting the unusually tense faces of the crew. Daniel set the device down with trembling hands, sweat dripping down his collar. Linda reached for his shoulder. "Daniel, what's happening to us?" He turned to her, his eyes wide with panic. "We just destroyed our own careers." Adrian closed the magazine and lifted his head. He wasn't angry. He wasn't smug. His gaze was calm, steady, and heavy. The look of a judge delivering a verdict. Linda shivered. Daniel dropped his eyes to the floor, barely able to breathe. And Margaret, still seated in 1A, her tiny dog resting across her lap, remained blissfully unaware that the seat she had fought so hard to claim was, in truth, her very own seat of execution. The engines that had been rumbling in preparation for taxiing suddenly quieted, leaving an unfamiliar emptiness in the first-class cabin. Passengers glanced around in confusion, whispering to each other. No one understood why the plane had stopped at the gate. The forward cabin door swung open. The sharp sound of measured footsteps sliced through the silence. Patricia Gomez, senior supervisor of JFK Airport, appeared in a crisp uniform, her eyes as cold and sharp as blades. Behind her stood 2 security officers, faces stiff and unreadable. The cabin fell into absolute stillness. Linda Marsh turned pale. Daniel Wu instinctively stepped back half a pace, his palms slick with sweat. Margaret Ellison frowned, her chin raised high. Still convinced this arrival was to help resolve her inconvenience. Patricia stopped in the aisle, her voice icy, each word dropping like a hammer. "Purser Daniel Wu. Lead Flight Attendant Linda Marsh. By direct order from the CEO's office of Aero Global, you are hereby terminated, effective immediately. Hand over your company IDs and leave the aircraft at once." The word terminated cracked through the cabin like thunder. Linda's mouth fell open, clutching her serving tray, stammering, This can't be. We only—" Patricia did not let her finish. "Reason. Gross violation of company policy, causing irreparable damage to a strategic client relationship. You are no longer employees of Aero Global as of this moment." The cabin seemed to stop breathing. A few passengers quickly pulled out their phones, pretending to be busy to avoid being pulled into the storm. Daniel's hands shook as he unclipped his ID badge. He fumbled so badly he could barely remove it, finally dropping it limply into Patricia's hand, his eyes vacant, the look of a man who had lost everything. Linda broke down, sobbing, pleading. "Please let me explain. It wasn't my fault. I was just following." Her voice cracked, but Patricia remained cold as stone. "Security, escort them out. No disturbance." The 2 officers stepped forward immediately. Linda screamed in despair, her cries echoing as she was led away like a criminal. Daniel trudged behind, each step heavy as stone. Passengers watched in stunned silence. Never in their lives had they seen flight attendants dismissed in front of customers before takeoff. Margaret stared, dumbstruck, not yet grasping what had just happened. She forced a brittle laugh, raising a hand toward Patricia. "Wait, I'm the one who needs an explanation. My husband is Robert Ellison. He—" Patricia never lowered her gaze. She walked right past Margaret, as if she were nothing more than a troublesome passenger. Margaret's world cracked in that instant. At seat 3B, Adrian Cole closed his magazine and rose calmly to his feet. No anger, no raised voice. He simply walked back toward seat 1A. Patricia bowed her head slightly toward him, her tone full of respect. "Dr. Cole, on behalf of the airline, I extend our deepest apologies. Seat 1A is ready for you. A replacement crew is already on the way." Adrian gave a small nod, his eyes sweeping the cabin with quiet composure. He did not look at Linda or Daniel. Their careers had been destroyed by their own prejudice. He did not spare a glance for Margaret either, now trembling in her seat, her small dog whining nervously in her lap. He sat down in seat 1A, the very place where he had been humiliated minutes earlier. But now the cabin was utterly silent. No contempt, no doubt, remained. Only fear and a hushed reverence. In that moment, everyone understood. Victory does not belong to the loudest voice. It belongs to the silent weight of true power. And the man they had dismissed as unworthy was, in fact, the one who held the fate of the entire airline in his hands. The first-class cabin still trembled in the aftermath of the storm that had just swept through. Linda Marsh and Daniel Wu had been escorted off the aircraft, leaving behind a silence as heavy as a funeral. A replacement crew hurried in, bowing repeatedly to Dr. Adrian Cole, their eyes betraying fear they could not hide. Margaret Ellison sat pressed into seat 3B, the very seat she had scorned only minutes before. Her carefully made-up face was now pale, her hands trembling as they stroked the tiny dog in her lap. She knew the tidal wave that had crashed down was not yet the end. Meanwhile, Adrian calmly slipped on his headphones and opened his tablet. He connected to the satellite link and initiated an emergency conference. Within seconds, 4 windows appeared on the screen. Sarah Jenkins, CFO, her eyes sharp and unyielding. Ben Carter, General Counsel, his brow furrowed tight. Michael Tanaka, COO, always decisive in tone. And Alicia Brooks, Head of Human Resources, her expression heavy with doubt. "Adrian, what is happening?" Sarah spoke first, her voice urgent. "Your emergency text made us think there was a technical issue, but then we saw the leaked report from Aero Global. Oh my God!" Adrian recounted everything in detail, from Linda's condescending look, to Margaret's triumphant smile, to Daniel's threat of removal from the flight. His voice was steady, calm, as though presenting a financial report, but every word landed with the weight of a hammer. Ben Carter clenched his fists, leaning closer to the camera. "So what you're saying is, the Ellison family, the very people we're preparing to acquire, were the ones who triggered this entire incident?" Adrian nodded. Margaret Ellison demanded to take seat 1A, and the entire crew bowed to her whim. The air on the call froze. Each face turned grave. They all understood. The $800 million deal to acquire Ellison Dynamics was no longer just a financial calculation. It had become a question of ethics, culture, and dignity. Alicia Brooks spoke, her voice low but slicing through the silence. We built Solara Tech on fairness and innovation. If we bring the Ellisons in, we invite poison into the DNA of this company. I am opposed. Michael Tanaka nodded instantly. Agreed. We do not need Ellison Dynamics at any cost. Especially after this, they would be a ticking time bomb within our culture. Sarah Jenkins sat in silence for a moment, then tapped her pen hard against the table. Adrian, do you have a formal proposal? We need a vote. Adrian looked directly into the camera. His eyes were cold as ice, his voice decisive. I propose we withdraw entirely from the acquisition of Ellison Dynamics. Effective immediately. Reason: reputational risk and conflict with our core values. For a moment, the four faces on screen were silent. Then Ben Carter nodded firmly. I support it. I will draft the termination notice and send it to Ellison within 24 hours. One by one, Sarah, Michael, and Alicia raised their hands in agreement. The vote took less than a minute, but the shockwave it unleashed would shatter an empire. Adrian muted his microphone and leaned back into seat 1A. His eyes slid toward Margaret Ellison, who was still trying to hide her desperation behind her layers of makeup. She did not yet know, or perhaps did not dare believe, that a single outburst in a first-class cabin had just cost Ellison Dynamics its final lifeline. High above the ground, before the plane had even left the gate, the death sentence of a dynasty had already been signed in the air. And it had not come from a boardroom full of shareholders, but from the moment a woman underestimated the wrong man in seat 1A. Cold rain lashed the Frankfurt runway like needles when flight AG-704 landed. The sky was leaden, streaks of water slicing down the windows like scars. In the first-class cabin, passengers hurried to gather their belongings. Only one man remained still, calm, his gaze distant. Dr. Adrian Cole. He knew the real battle had only just begun. The cabin door opened, and a figure appeared at the jet bridge. His $1 million suit was wrinkled, his eyes bloodshot from sleeplessness, his face haggard. Richard Hale, CEO of Aero Global, a man once known for his icy authority and unshakable power, now looked like someone fleeing a burning house. He had flown through the night on a private jet just to be here. Richard rushed forward, his voice hoarse. Adrian, I have no words strong enough to apologize. Adrian stood tall, his dark eyes unreadable, giving nothing away. He let Richard speak, let each word fall into the heavy silence of the terminal. What my employees did is unforgivable, Richard blurted, his hands trembling. I have fired them. We will launch a full investigation, change our policies, retrain from the ground up. I swear, this will never happen again. Adrian tilted his head slightly, his voice low and cold as steel. Richard, your employees did not make a mistake. They merely reflected a culture you have allowed to fester for too long. The problem was never one flight attendant or one purser. The problem lies in the way your people look at a customer and decide who is worthy. Richard stammered, desperation in his eyes. "Adrian, please reconsider. Don't let the Solara Tech contract fall into the hands of our rivals. Aero Global needs you. The market needs you." Adrian cut him off, his eyes suddenly blazing. "No. What I care about right now is not your contract. It's her, Margaret Ellison." Richard froze. "Robert Ellison's wife?" Adrian nodded, his voice rumbling like distant thunder. "She was the one who started it all. And her husband Robert, the CEO of Ellison Dynamics. We just held a meeting in the air and agreed. The acquisition of Ellison Dynamics is finished." The words fell like a bomb. Richard went pale, stumbling back half a step, his body drained of strength. He knew too well. Ellison Dynamics was already teetering on the edge. Losing Solara Tech was like a ship with a gaping hole in its hull, sinking in open waters. And Aero Global, whether by accident or complicity, had just become the direct reason the deal evaporated. In that instant, Richard realized he had not only lost his biggest customer, he had triggered a chain reaction that could drag both empires into the abyss. Adrian walked past him slowly, never looking back. His voice rang out, deep and resolute, echoing through the suffocating air of the jet bridge. "They looked down on me because of my skin. You looked down on me because of my silence. And both will pay. In full." Richard stood frozen, watching Adrian's straight figure fade away. At the far corner of the terminal, Margaret Ellison staggered out, her face chalk white, her makeup smeared by tears. She had just received a message from her husband. Solara Tech had pulled out of the deal. Everything was lost. In her mind, Adrian's final words thundered like a verdict. They will pay, in full. And she understood. The seat 1A she had fought to claim at any cost was the very seat that had just signed the death warrant of the Ellison Empire. News traveled faster than a storm. Within just 48 hours after flight AG 714, the financial markets were in turmoil. The phrase, "Solara Tech cancels Ellison Dynamics deal," dominated economic headlines, sending shockwaves of panic through investors. Ellison Dynamics stock went into free fall, percentage points vanishing like dust in the wind. Creditors who had been waiting on the sidelines now pounced, calling in debts all at once. Within a single week, the once proud conglomerate was forced to file for bankruptcy. Inside the vast Greenwich mansion, Robert Ellison sat frozen before the screen. The red words "trading halted" flashed like a blade cutting into his heart. He knew his life's work had not ended at a negotiating table, but because of his wife's reckless arrogance on a single flight. Robert's hands trembled as he picked up the phone. On the other end, Margaret sobbed uncontrollably. "Robert, you have to believe me. I only wanted seat 1A. I didn't know it was him." Robert dropped the receiver, unable to utter a word. In that moment, he understood with piercing clarity. Margaret's blind pride had destroyed not only their marriage, but also the empire he had built with his own blood. The mansion was seized. Cars, yachts, priceless paintings, all stripped away. Margaret Ellison, once striding proudly through glittering soirees, now shrank into a dingy apartment, left only with memories of that fateful moment in seat 1A, the moment that transformed her from tycoon's wife into someone despised. In New York, the fate of the two who once strutted through first class was no better. Linda Marsh, dismissed for serious misconduct, sent applications everywhere. But every time her resume was submitted, the answer was the same: rejection. Her name had become synonymous with the Aero-Global scandal, a warning whispered across the industry. Don't even think about hiring her. In her final days as a flight attendant, Linda sat alone in her cramped apartment, staring at the faded uniform hanging in her closet, as though staring into her own life, once glamorous, now nothing but a withered memory. Daniel Wu, the purser who had once taken pride in his authority in the sky, also fell. No airline would touch a manager publicly disgraced for bowing to prejudice and false power. After months of unemployment, Daniel accepted a night shift managing a warehouse. From the chime of boarding calls to the creak of forklifts, from first-class cabins to cold storage aisles, his career ended in darkness without applause, only the sterile beep of barcodes. By contrast, Dr. Adrian Cole paid no mind to those who had crumbled. In Frankfurt, he signed a historic contract with the German automaker, officially ushering in a new era for Solara Tech. The press hailed him as the man who turned humiliation into power, proof that calm silence can sometimes be the most formidable weapon. Under the flashing cameras, Adrian remained composed. He knew true victory was not found in the downfall of others, but in upholding the values he defended: fairness, dignity, and the strength of integrity. One seat, one moment, one act of disdain. Yet its consequences spread like a tsunami, toppling an empire, crushing the pride of the arrogant, and leaving a permanent mark on the history of aviation. And all of it happened because they misjudged the man sitting in seat 1A. 3 months after the scandal, the New York sky glowed under the late autumn sun. From the 80th floor of Solara Tech Tower, Dr. Adrian Cole stood before a vast glass wall, gazing down at the endless stream of cars that pulsed like the city's lifeblood. Below was the chaos, the noise, the stubborn old prejudices woven into every breath. But up here, he was preparing to lay the foundation for something unprecedented. On the obsidian desk before him was not a $1 billion contract, but an old photograph. His father, William Cole, stood outside Grand Central Station in a faded porter's uniform, arms wrapped around someone else's suitcase, a weary smile on his lips, yet a steady light in his eyes. A man forced to spend his life on society's lowest rung, but who never once surrendered his dignity. Adrian closed his eyes, hearing his father's voice echo through memory. They will try to lock you in a box. Don't waste your strength fighting it. Build your own floor above it. That very day, Aero-Global sent a delegation to Solara Tech Tower, not to sign a mere commercial contract, but to beg Adrian to become a permanent advisor to their board of directors, ensuring that the disaster of discrimination would never repeat itself. Across the table, Adrian faced CEO Richard Hale. His gaze was no longer cold, but contemplative. "I will accept," Adrian said slowly, "but under one condition." Richard swallowed, his voice urgent. "Any condition, Adrian." Adrian leaned forward, his voice deep and unwavering. "We will create the William Cole Scholarship Fund, jointly supported by Solara Tech and Aero-Global. It will be dedicated to young men and women of color, immigrants, those who dream of entering aviation as pilots, engineers, and senior leaders. I don't want to be just a voice in a boardroom. I want the next generation to never have to fight simply to sit in the seat they already paid for. The room fell silent. Then Richard rose, extended his hand, and spoke with a trembling voice. You have given us a chance to make amends, and I promise history will never repeat itself. 1 month later, at the scholarship's public announcement, Adrian stepped to the podium. Hundreds of young faces looked up at him, eyes shining with hope. He told them about his father, about the fateful AG 714 flight, about seat 1A that had once been taken from him, and how that very seat had become a symbol of transformation. Success is not measured by the seat you occupy, Adrian declared, his voice resonating through the hall. It is measured by how you rise when you are pushed down, and by how you use your strength to lift others with you. The hall erupted in thunderous applause, and in that moment, Adrian knew he had turned personal humiliation into a lever powerful enough to shift an entire industry. Meanwhile, in a small apartment on the outskirts of town, Margaret Ellison sat curled by the window, staring at a newspaper with the headline, "William Cole Scholarship Opens New Doors for the Next Generation." She gripped a cheap teacup tightly, pain stabbing her chest. She had once believed seat 1A was a privilege reserved for her. Now she understood. It belonged to those who earned it with dignity and intellect, not to an Ellison name or a VIP card. Back in his office, Adrian stood once more before the glass wall, the autumn winds howling outside. He no longer saw a seat. He saw an entire tower rising, new floors built by him and the generations to come. The skies above were clear. The flight path stretched wide. And from seat 1A, Adrian Cole had left behind a legacy, turning prejudice into motivation, humiliation into change, and silence into the strength to lift an intergeneration with him. Flight AG 714 may have ended, but its aftershocks still echo. Seat 1A was never just a place on an airplane. It was a test of dignity, of fairness, and of how people choose to treat one another. Dr. Adrian Cole proved that true power does not need to be displayed. It lives in calm silence, yet it is strong enough to change the world. If you believe that dignity will always outweigh privilege, press like on this video. Subscribe so you will not miss the next stories of justice and inspiration, and leave a comment with just 2 words, "right seat," to remind each other that the place we deserve is never anyone else's to take away.